over at Nobility during the pandemic and even in this last year. And so when it came time for Access U again, I'm looking and thinking, well, okay, this is a great crew. This is a great staff I have, but there's not a lot of deep experience about Access U. So I called Jane and I said, how would you like to come to Austin in May? And she said yes, and I'm so grateful. And Jane's just the first. I mean, I just mentioned this staff. This is an incredible staff who worked so hard to make this. And so all of you staff members who are in the room, please stand up and let us thank you. And I want to give a special shout out to our tech team who led off with their long this long week. Mark and Terry and Adam, where's Adam? Y'all just supported this. You know, it's a hybrid conference. We're trying to get people online and in the lobby and make things available. And it was complicated. You would have thought there was an army, but really it was just this very small, very talented team. So thank you. Thank you all. I really, I can't thank you enough, in fact, but I also want to mention, we decided this year, okay, we're not going to try to do it alone. We're going to get some outside help. And so we hired an event coordinator. You've all met Lahoma and her team. Weren't they fantastic? And Terry Colin and his team. I mean, we've just had really great help. And again, it all comes back to this community and how the people who were here for the first time as helpers remarked, what a great group this is. Everybody's so appreciative and so nice. And I thought, yes, that's my family. So thank you all. Thank you so much. And of course, oh, how could I forget? I have to thank our sponsors, our underwriters from Visa, Evinced, Barrier Break, IAAP, and IAAP was here all week and really had a great presence. And the folks from Oklahoma Able Tech. So we love our sponsors and let's give them a hand. And I probably could just go on thanking and thanking and thanking because I think this is such an organic thing that happens with Access U and the way we come together and support and teach each other. Fable. Oh, I forgot to thank Fable. And thankfully Jillian's gone, so she didn't realize that I dropped that out. Thank you. Thank you, Utah, for reminding me. So now it is my great pleasure to, are there any other announcements I need to make about the Learning Center or when things will be available or any of that? As soon as possible. Okay. So this closing keynote is something that I think it's going to be profound, and I think it's going to resonate with us for a while. And I think it's probably just the beginning of the conversation that we're going to have around this issue. And so I brought two of the most different from each other and incommonly brilliant thinkers about this that I could imagine. And you guys laughing at me? You are. So this week you may have already heard from Utah Treviranus. She's the founding director of the Inclusive Design Research Center in Toronto. She's a professor of a graduate program in inclusive design. And she told me if I talked much longer, she would tell me just go look it up on Wikipedia. But she is brilliant and really, when I hear some of the ways that Utah thinks and talks about this topic and probably just about anything, it's not superficial. It's not reactionary. She thinks deeply and well, profoundly about about this whole area of disability, technology, the intersection, designing for the margins. It's remarkable, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say to us today. And she's going to be talking to Kelsey Ruger, who is an old friend of Knowbility. He was actually on our founding board of directors. When I first met Kelsey, he was a young developer, the lead developer at Prodigy, which some of you may remember. Prodigy was a and that company was the first company. They invited me and John Slayton to come to some of their design brainstorming, showing off prototypes. They were trying to integrate accessibility into what they were doing in 1999, 2000, 2001. And ever since then, Kelsey's he's a serial entrepreneur. Then every time I talk to him, he's starting or working for some new company. And he always brings that philosophy of accessibility, and he brings it in a practical way. And he talks to his team about what has to happen and why, from understanding that they have, you know, these business drivers, and that he's got to talk to them in their language. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And I think I'll just start off by, I'll ask you first, Kelsey, and then you could answer the same question of, so what is your general perspective about these emerging technologies of AI, AR, VR, XR?
You know, I'll start, and this isn't even a story I told you. The first time I did something that was quote unquote AI, it was in high school. And the teacher challenged us for a computer science fair. Hey, make a program that will answer questions for people. And back then we didn't know that we were fooling people. Like, and I think we'll get into this, like what is truly AI. But for me, ever since then, AI has really been sort of this thing that was out there that would allow computers to act like humans. And I think how many of you are familiar with the law of the diffusion of innovation? So I think right now what we're seeing is we're getting to that chasm where it's becoming more mainstream and more known to people. So they think it's new, but you'll hear us say that it's been around a while, at least the research and some of the things. But for me, the thing that I've sort of landed on with AI is not just about computers trying to replicate human intelligence. There's also this idea of what parts of what we do should be automated by the computers, what parts of what we as humans do should simply be augmented. And then there's this area where we should remain autonomous, and we should let humans do it, either because it's intrinsically rewarding to us, or because there are things that the computers don't yet know how to recognize about humans that we should leave in the realm of being human. And so didn't talk a lot about technology there, only because I think for me, it's still evolving. And while we have computers and, you know, generative AI, we'll talk a lot about that can sort of replicate, or it looks like it could replicate what we're doing. It's really still just math and patterns. And we'll talk a lot about why those patterns are actually the problem that we still have to sort of address and overcome.
Utah.
Well, given that you started with sort of an origin story, I'm going to change the answer that I was going to say. So I started dabbling with AI, and I was extremely hopeful about AI back in the 80s when I was looking at a speech recognition system for dysarthric speech. And we actually had some really, really interesting results. But then, so I've been going hot and cold with AI. The period of alarm was in 2014, and some of you may have heard this story. I've heard it repeated elsewhere as well. When I was asked to look at an automated vehicle, a set of automated vehicle machine learning models, and they wanted to see how they would perform with respect to a variety of things. And I decided to test them with something that was completely unexpected. And it was a capture of a friend of mine who pushes her wheelchair backwards. She has cerebral palsy. She can't stand very well, but she's very, very fast and very efficient and fairly erratic as she goes across intersections. And people tend to grab her chair and push her back to where she came from, thinking she'd lost control. But these machine learning models all decided to proceed through the intersection and then effectively run her over. But they all said, don't worry, these are immature models. They've had no data about people in wheelchairs and intersections. We will train them and fill that data gap, come back when they're better trained. Well, when I came back with the well-trained, more mature models, lo and behold, they all chose to run my friend over with greater confidence. Because the models were confident that somebody who's in a wheelchair is going to go forward. And so that started me down this road. I mean, we're talking about a statistical reasoning machine. And people with disabilities are at the extreme edges of that scatter plot, the statistical scatter plot. So that basically means that you have both the extreme opportunities, but also the extreme risks. And I often say that disability is the Achilles heel of AI. It's a complete and utter mismatch because you have huge diversity, you have unpredictability. And so if AI were to actually serve people with disabilities, we would have a very, very different form of AI. But at the moment, it's a discrimination machine. And it works really wonderfully for things out in your environment that are average or typical, like recognizing whether it's, a male or female washroom or reading pill things. But even there, if your environment or your voice or the way that you look or is different in any way, then it doesn't work very well. So for the people who need it the most, it's probably performs the worst. So even though I say it's you have the extreme opportunities and the extreme risks, it still needs to be improved quite a bit.
Yeah. A funny story about that is, you guys remember when the Xboxes had the little camera that you'd put in front of the TV and you could dance and stuff? That thing never worked for me because it did not detect my height. Like it would always cut off at my head. And I always used to think, like, didn't Microsoft think of that before they released this, that there's tall people out there?
Well, I think that idea that it's a discrimination machine is something that we're going to have to go a little further in exploring exactly what that means. But y'all told me before we started that I was to tell the audience that these speakers would very much like this to be a dialogue. So at any point, if you have a question or a comment, or you want to add to the discussion, please just raise your hand. Oh, do we have a microphone that we can bring them? So we'll repeat the question. Okay, we'll repeat the question. Okay, and you're watching the chat. Okay. So we don't have AI watching the chat, do we? Okay, so Peter is already ready with his comment or question.
Well, Kelsey, in describing the models of AI in relation, you described everything in relation to how the computer relates to the human. What happens if the computer relates to the computer? So it focuses on understanding what it does itself without human. I know it's all programmed by human, but maybe that's not possible to do. But
Okay, let me see if I can rephrase your question or do you think you understand it enough to repeat it?
I think I do. So
Okay,
what you're describing sounds a lot like deep learning.
Well,
Okay.
repeat the question for
So
the folks at home.
The question. Okay.
That's what we were gonna try to do. And I think that what Peter just asked is that when Kelsey spoke about the models, he spoke about it in relation to other humans. But what happens if the AI relates to other computers, relates to other machines and machine thinking. Was that a proper statement?
So I think that is sort of at the core of what you and I are saying is the machines only know what the machines know. And so in this, the way I typically think of what you just asked is what I call deep learning, where the machine is teaching itself based on the information it already knows. I think you run in those cases an even higher risk of there being bias introduced because it started with a set of data that it knew about. It's building on that based on the data that it knew about. The best example I could give you is there's a book called Flat World. You guys have read that, where the flat people only knew what the flat people knew, right? Flatland. And so it's the same thing, like the computer only knows what the computer knows. And so while the computer may not mean to introduce bias or discrimination, it doesn't know not to do that because it only knows what it knows. I don't know if that answered your question completely.
Yeah, it forms a feedback loop.
Yeah.
So it intensifies the discrimination or the narrowness of the reductionism that is within the machine.
So talk more about the discrimination machine, if you would.
Yeah, actually, in our conversation earlier, we were thinking about how does this relate to the accessibility community and the accessibility movement. And one of the things that I've been thinking quite a bit about is that this is a different animal than anything that we've really ever encountered before with respect to accessibility. Before, we were looking at what are the barriers to participation? How are people with disabilities excluded? How is this made in such a way that you can't use it? But what we have here is we have something that is designed to discriminate. So it is designed to, in fact, in essence, I mean, if we take it to its extreme, it is a very pervasive, very diffuse and hard to detect, almost eugenics machine to some extent, because what it's doing is it's optimizing the successes of the past. It's imposing our past onto our futures. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy machine. It will make selections and then continuously refine those selections. And if you are not in the picture of what was successful in the past, if you weren't a successful employee, a successful student, etc., then you're not part of what will move forward, what will be selected, what will be given opportunities. And so I think the accessibility community needs to rethink how we approach this. This is, I think, quite alarming. And the other thing that I'm worried about is that our focus is very much on the chat GPT, the generative AI, the LLMs that fill all the news cycles, and that we hear about something new every day. Oh, isn't this wonderful? Or utopian, dystopian stories that catch our attention. And what we're ignoring is the AI that is already everywhere and making a whole bunch of really critical decisions about who gets health care, what parents get to keep their kids, who gets into a college, who gets screened at the airport, who gets a tax audit. We did a quick study and we saw that if you have a disability, you have far more false positive tagging for tax audits because you're unusual. And so your record isn't recognized. And so you are going to be called up if you go through security, if the surveillance systems that are part of defense are causing far more collateral damage for individuals that are unlike what the system recognizes or expects. So it's very, very pervasive, but we're distracted right now by things like ChatGPT or the large language models and the very dystopian, utopian stories that come up.
Kelsey, do you see that reflected also in the way businesses are making decisions?
I think we all see it. Probably the biggest example is your credit score, right? Like your credit score is based on a set of historical factors about who you may or may not be that in many cases are based on some systematic things that were put in place in our country, it's decades ago, that now are being statistically analyzed based on that data. And so if you think about it this way, if you come from a minority background, you may have been prevented from, your family may have been prevented from buying property or opening a business or getting credit, and that has played forward. And now those same models are now statistically being analyzed to say you are or are not worthy of credit. And you see that in different areas. And like you said, it's healthcare, it's everything. So a lot of it is figuring out what data should we be using it to teach the machines so that we get a better result. And what the challenge really is, what do we teach the machines to ignore? And what do we teach it to pay more attention to?
But I think one of the unfortunate things within AI ethics is it's characterized as a data desert or a data gap, right? So the what is said is we just need to add more data, or we need to have full proportional representation of everyone, and then the machine should understand everyone. But that isn't, I mean, that does not address the issue of disability discrimination, because if you have a disability, you are so diverse from anyone else. So you are an outlier. And even if we have full representation within the data set, it's still going to rule against us, right? Because we are these tiny minorities.
I am US client, and I student run enterprise office, and I always see the accessibility of software and the lack of accessibility as a multiplier impact. So if you have software that is inaccessible, it then ends up creating hiring discrimination. Because
Yeah.
you see the success or failure of certain types of employees based on the fact that their software was successful, they weren't able to perform because they got disability on their job as well. And then that will get factored into
The hiring
decision making when hiring in the future, that not necessarily defining the concept like, oh, disabled employees can't do the job because of software. They just say that we see that these people have been not successful in this role. And it's really because of the inaccessibility of the software, but the artificial intelligence or even the human intelligence and all the information cannot identify that it was the software as a barrier, not the disability.
Yeah, and so what
Are you
the-
going to repeat?
Yeah, I'm going to
Okay.
repeat. So it's the inaccessibility that then becomes, that creates a situation where it's assumed that the person with a disability cannot perform the job rather than the inaccessibility of the system. And that it creates a vicious cycle. And I agree. The issue is it was a vicious cycle before AI came into the scene. And unfortunately, what's happening with AI is that it's like a power tool. Before we were using a manual saw, now we have this massive saw. And so it's amplifying, accelerating, and automating that discrimination. And it's exonerating the humans from the discrimination that is happening with the tool. So yeah, accessibility is also an issue here, because really, we need to have people with disabilities participating in every role of the AI life cycle. So as designers, as planners, as et cetera. So it needs to be not just, can we use these AI tools, but also can we be at the table when the decisions are being made as to how they're going to be designed, what they're going to be used for. So we need to do not just, if we're talking about the equivalent of WCAG versus the other things, we definitely need an ATAG type of approach as well.
ATAG for authoring tool accessibility guidelines. That's all.
I think that also points out there are still some contexts where you need a human, because a machine wouldn't have reasoned through that the same way a human did, right? And so I think there are some contexts where that humanity is still necessary to get to the right result.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah, right.
Humanity is still necessary for some things. Okay, that's good to know.
And actually, I want to comment on something you said about the Turing test, and which for those of you who don't know what the Turing test is, the Turing test was supposed to be the ultimate test for whether AI had reached its ultimate goal, which was, can it fool somebody to think that it was a person that did it as opposed to a machine that did it. And it's just so mind-boggling. Why are we trying to replace human intelligence as opposed to augmenting or helping? Like, why is the ultimate goal of the AI to replace humans? It's quite, I think we need a very, very different test with respect to, is AI doing what we want it to do?
Okay, well, let me get the question in the room first,
there were
if you don't
two.
mind. Mike has had his hand up for a while. Made you think of what?
Failure analysis.
Okay. Failure announcements.
Continue to be discriminated against because these models are looking at this historically. And then either you keep talking about hiring because someone was unsuccessful because of the software that they had to use in their job. Then now we're not going to hire anybody. We're going to use that as our model to say, this is how we're going to hire. But what we've done is skip the failure analysis part and said, and jump right to the conclusion. So you guys talk to how AI might be used to do the failure analysis with the goal of not making a decision, but the goal of actually fixing the analyzing the problem, finding the path forward to fix what the deficiency, what the problem was.
So
And so
Mike
they-
just asked how we could use failure AI to do the failure analysis
Right.
that would allow us not to perpetuate and amplify the discrimination that's happened in the past.
So the unfortunate thing is that the AI is currently trained just on the data traces of what happens. So the tests, the measures, the data outcomes, rather than any sort of understanding of, why. There's no why in the training data. But perhaps that is something that
Can I
an
scroll up?
approach that should be taken, where there is more information about the actual situation, the context, etc. But right now, all that happens is you have a polluted set of data. And as the systems get more advanced, there is little labeling or even thoughts as to what the proxies should be if there's data missing. And so that it's actually getting worse in terms of determining the whys as opposed to the whats. But maybe you can go into.
I was going to say, because in both of the cases that you mentioned, Mike, the driver is some enterprise, right? And the cynical Kelsey says they already can do that, right? But they're okay with saying, I'm okay with this 80%, and I'm okay dropping the 20% because I feel like there is a statistical probability that this 80% will get me what I need. It's not like they can't do that. They can do that. The problem is actually that the companies or the entities behind it are okay losing the 20% in favor of the 80%.
So a question from the audience at home is, do you think AI could be used in the future to automate more manual testing issues by helping to check some of the answers in a guided review, such as the alt text describes each image correctly, etc.?
So AI is great at anything that is formulaic and that we can mechanize. It's not great at those more, I guess, fuzzy human, unpredictable things. So yes, I mean, there is, if you can write a set of rules, if you can show a set of examples that it can learn from, then that can be mechanized, which actually gets to some extent to And can I go off tangent for a second?
Yes, please do.
Because one of the things I worry about is we've sort of been doubling, I'm a professor, right? I'm in education. And we've been doubling down on all those formulaic things, all those mechanizable skills with respect to STEM and with respect to standardizing learners. Well, it's the standardized things that the machines can replicate. If you look at the Uber situation, they're actually, to some extent, the reason they're collecting all that data is because ultimately they want to replace the drivers, and they want to optimize the automated systems to satisfy the customers, so increase profit. We are creating this collision course between education and AI development, such that many of the individuals that we're training and the reduction of English and humanities and all of those courses and topics that AI can't handle are the things that we're actually getting rid of within our education system.
Well, this next question kind of segues. Kelsey, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, add to what you just said is agree on a set of rules, or have a set of rules that everyone agrees on.
Yeah,
Because you can have the rules, and if everyone doesn't agree on the rule set, then what is the AI gonna check against? And I'm always I'm careful to tell people AI, but not necessarily, because you just already said ChatGPT is very heavy in the news, but even if you give it a set of rules because of what it is, you could actually get it to still give you a wrong answer. The example I give everyone is you could ask ChatGPT, and I may or not still work. What's 1 + 1? It'll give you the right answer. If you tell it, my spouse told me that that's not the right answer and I just got yelled at, it's going to probably tell you, well, indeed, 1 + 1 is 3 or something like that. So it will, you can make it give you the wrong answer based on the context that you're giving it. And so it has the agreed upon and not necessarily a generative model that you're using to check.
And Sharon said I could use this word, but a great way to characterize ChatGPT is it is a bullshit machine. It's trying to create persuasive bullshit, right? So it's definitely not attempting to be accurate or to even justify what it says. It wants to be persuasive and sound like it's believable.
And the local news tonight is going to say, and at XSU today, we learned that ChatGPT is bullshit. So, well, so here's a good question maybe that is related to this. Do you think that we could teach AI empathy through simulating human neurology within the artificial neural network?
My answer is going to be sarcastic, but can we teach humans?
You have anything
Well,
to
I
add to
already
that?
answered anything you can mechanize, and I don't think we can mechanize.
Empathy. Okay, well, when we were talking earlier, we spoke about tech's, you know, their guidance to move fast and break things, and how that has not worked out well for the disability community in terms, just in general terms of being part and being included. So what do you think are some strategies for this community going forward? And I'll just leave to whoever wants to answer that first, because I think that's what this kind of a gathering wants to know. So, okay, we understand the risks. We haven't talked much about the opportunities. Should we do that too? But I think let's talk about strategy. What do we do as a community?
Well, actually, you're talking about risks and opportunities. One of the things that I think is quite unfortunate is we reduce the complexity of this issue. The really life-changing, wonderful tools that AI affords are often used as a way of whitewashing AI applications. Oh, you know what, we shouldn't shut down AI because look at, we're going to deny people who are blind from using something that will guide, etc., or we're going to deny. I think we need to understand that this is a very, very complex issue and not characterize it in a single way. I also think that, this isn't, I'm trying not to be harsh. I'm in the accessibility community, but sometimes I think that we have this hammer that is the web content accessibility guidelines. And so everything else sort of looks like a nail. And so we try to use the WCAG tool as a way to address VR, or we try to virtual reality systems, or we think that it might be usable for AI. But this is an animal of a completely different sort. And so we need to rethink, and we need far more, we have dynamic systems, we have unpredictable systems, we have equity discrimination issues in addition to the accessibility issues. So I think we need to step back and say, how do we create a set of tools to address this that fit this completely new situation? But you may have.
The world I come from, everything moves so fast because in the startup world and the enterprise, the thing that I always keep in the back of my mind is these things are moving forward, whether we like them or not. And so how do you stay far enough ahead of it so that they don't break as many things and they don't, cause as much damage as you think might be there. And so some of the strategy, and this is, Sharon's heard me say this for years, is I have rarely in my career tried to directly influence accessibility. We just built it right in from the beginning. So you teach at the very beginning. And so I think some of the strategies would be embedding this in the tools, embedding this in education, so that you're not having to educate people as they come up and they're building tools using these things. And so those are the sort of core strategies I might use, is put in the tools, teach.
You mean building inclusive tools?
Right.
Right from the start. Yeah, Kelsey's the one who taught me the phrase that minimum viable product isn't viable if it's not accessible.
And you mentioned education. What we need to make sure is that AI education is accessible, and that people with disabilities can participate in AI education, and that accessible and equitable AI is part of the curriculum when people are taught AI. Unfortunately, I mean, as you say, this has already moved forward. So one of the things that I think I've learned is that there's no way to retrofit these digital systems. I mean, once they're adopted, they're out there, they're morphing, and many things are built on top of each other. So being as proactive as possible. But how do we turn back this particular thing? We really can't. So the one hope I have is that there's sufficient alarm about the possibilities of this for everybody, and the potential harm that this can do, and the lack of control that the developers actually have of it, that they will pause and we can rethink some of those fundamental things, that because it's not just the AI is in a sense a mirror of ourselves, of what we value, what we see as true, our conventions, what we reward and what we punish, and who we think is worthy and who isn't, etc. It is simply amplifying that and mirroring it back to us. So is this an opportunity to say, whoa, this is not where we want to go, and thereby also rethink all of those conventions and values and mindsets that are discriminating against our community and against people with disabilities.
And once they're rethought, then how do we, I mean, you mentioned earlier the blueprint for ethical AI, that's
Yeah, there is legislation out there, but all of it is going through what we call the sausage factory, which means that it doesn't come out at all looking like what it went in as. There's very distressing here in the US debates within Congress regarding AI, where Eric Schmidt and others are saying, well, we have to power ahead and everything will come out okay because it's either US wins or China wins. And do you want a world that is ruled by China, which is sort of like, whoa, is that, but there is in fact a very, very good document that the US has developed, which is a blueprint for human rights in AI. I think that's the exact title. Well, anyways, blueprint. But of course, because it's a blueprint, it isn't in regulation. But there's been it is a blueprint for things like, how can you make AI contestable? How can you make it transparent? How can you make it explainable? And what are the rights that you need to think of when you're developing these systems? Unfortunately, the things that are actually going into legislation are not at all that comprehensive. And the NIST framework, which is one of the guidance documents that has recently come out, is using a risk-benefit analysis. Well, you can just imagine with most of the risk-benefit analyses or frameworks, the benefits for the majority are probably going to outweigh the extreme risks for the few. So that really isn't a way to protect human rights. There are other legislative instruments that are coming out, like the EU AI Act, and that as well is being sort of decimated to some extent by many of the companies that are trying to defend their right to do whatever they wish with the AI.
Any other questions from the group? Well, one of the things that sorry.
Yeah, what I was really, I think I figured out what I was really trying to ask before, which is it possible to decouple the AI from the humans?
Is it possible to decouple the AI from the human inputs so that it can teach itself to be a better computer?
Well, there are already AI systems which are training AI systems and coming up with teach itself to what is though, who defines what is a better computer?
Never mind, Peter says.
This is an interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
I was going to say that we as humans may not like the answer that the machine arrives at by itself.
Yeah.
So Kelsey, earlier when we were talking, you said that businesses will sign on to ethical practices as long as they don't actually have to do anything. That's not exactly it. What I said is I don't like it when businesses sign, and I'll use, for example, like everyone's heard of SOC 2 or PCI, right? Like companies sign up for that all the time to be able to put a little seal on their website that says we are SOC 2. But when it comes right down to it, are they all willing to follow all of the processes to make sure that they actually are compliant? And it's sort of the same thing with this, right? Like companies may sign up just like they signed up for DEI, right? Like how well has that played out for all of the companies that in 2020 said, we're raising our hand and saying we're going to do this. If you look back and you see what they've actually done, it's not much, right? And so I think it's sort of the same thing here. Whatever we put in place for this has to be something that isn't just for PR. It has to be something that's actionable and maintainable.
Yeah, and usually and often it's the inspiration porn that people with disabilities are used for the company, and these lovely stories that say how wonderful it is, which is not really telling the full story.
So didn't you recently submit recommendations for the ethics of AI to the Canadian government?
Yeah. So,
Why do you laugh? What do you?
no, I did. Well, actually, and this is, not everybody hears this. Right?
Not, yeah,
what
everybody
what
does hear
hoping
this,
is,
so.
that it'll slip under the radar. So yes, I was contracted to write a draft AI standard for the Accessible Canada Act. And I did submit it, and I called it Accessible and Equitable AI, and it has 4 parts. The first is about how to ensure that people with disabilities can participate in all roles of AI. The second part is about the treatment of people with disabilities by AI in the decision-making and in the various systems. The third part is about what organizations need to do to create ethical and accessible AI, including things like transparency and explainability and contestability. And the fourth part is about AI education. And actually one other thing besides education has to include topics like equitable and accessible AI, and people with disabilities need to be able to participate in education about AI. But then there's also another part, which is that any feedback and any contestation or any complaints about the AI also need to be fed back into the AI so that it can self-correct. Which isn't the case at the moment. But because I'm hoping that actually the dismissal of disability and accessibility by the general legislative groups out there is going to mean that they're not going to pay much attention. No, it's just that side thing. And while they're arguing in Canada anyways, and elsewhere, in Canada, we have this thing called ADA, which is the general regulations about AI. While they're attending to that, we'll just get this into enacted, and then within that, I have all of the very, very strong requirements that are not in the ADA.
After explaining that, now I get your strategy, because I was going to ask you if you watched the hearings that we had here
Oh, I know.
on
Yeah.
Facebook and TikTok, you would never get our legislation to even understand
Yeah.
what you're talking about. So yours is like, maybe they don't understand it.
Right.
And we'll just,
Yeah,
good idea.
they'll dismiss it. It's just that trivial sort of fringe thing of disability and accessibility.
Boughton has a question or a comment.
Yes, I actually have 2. First of all, everyone remembers the 1970s.
Do you want to come use the mic so that I don't have to remember all the details of your blast from the past?
If anyone remembers the 1970s film Westworld, the root problem was all these robots were designed by other robots, other machines. The second part, so far we've been talking about the ethical development of AI. I would like to ask about some guidelines for the ethical consumption and use of AI, such as posting graphics to web pages, using AI to compose content for web pages. Thank you.
I'll address the latter, the last part you talked about. The patent office here, I'm not the patent office, but the trademark office here in the US is already starting to issue statements on AI or images that are generated from AI. And what they're basically saying is, you can't claim that you created that thing. They don't say that you have to give credit to AI, which is what I think maybe you're asking. They're just saying you can't say it was an original work. You can't. So I think that part is still developing. I actually did a presentation a few weeks ago, and I actually told the audience before, like, every image in this presentation was generated with AI, just so they knew, even though if I hadn't told them, they would never guess.
Yeah.
Because it looked very real. Other than I noticed later, one of the kids in there had 6 fingers. But they didn't notice that, so.
Kelsey told me a story earlier where his friend had composed a story on using AI for his daughter, and his daughter was really bored, and Kelsey said he re-prompted and told the AI to use silly names, and then the kid just loved the story.
That
so.
was Thomas. Thomas is gonna say that's not exactly how it went.
Oh. Yeah. Thomas, we thought you were gonna be talking here too. We thought you were gonna be chiming in with questions and comments, because this is your field too, right? Yeah, overlaps. I think
Well-
all of us overlap now these days with this.
Yeah, and if I can comment further, of course, one of the areas that is of great concern within academia is students cheating and not actually doing the work. But I actually don't worry about that much, because I think we need to rethink what we mean about cheating. Because this notion of cheating, which often, I mean, collaboration is often seen as cheating. If we start to police the system, then we're going to create better cheaters of the students that are there, which is also probably not that terrible. What I want to do is actually get this. I actually ask the students to use it and to look at the results of it and find the flaws, find the biases, and use it to train critical thinking. We're not going to prevent students from actually using the systems, and they're going to get better and better at fooling the academics that this has been created by the students. But you wanted to.
But, sorry. I've always said cheating is a result of the thing you're asking the students to measure against.
Exactly,
Right?
yeah,
Like
right.
Look at the system, not.
Yeah, I don't believe in this concept
Yeah.
of cheating. Yeah.
Do you want to come use the mic so that my human translation is not,
And then I have one other addition to that question.
well, go ahead, and while Elizabeth's
Well,
coming up.
okay. No, it's okay. You can
Okay.
go ahead.
Hi, Elizabeth Hayward. I'm work at a higher ed university that has actively been pursuing how can we leverage AI for the good and not for evil, of course. But I recently saw in EDUCAUSE, are you familiar with that organization? That EDUCAUSE had done a survey of academicians and students, and that some students, not the faculty, but the students saw AI as a potential assistive technology. And then I saw another survey where the results, or they had done some study, and I don't know how scientific it was, but they found that students who were using AI, they had a control group of students who did not use AI to produce a paper, and then another group who did use it. And they were timing how much time was spent in different aspects of producing that report. And the control group spent a lot of time at the front getting things put together, and then didn't have as much time to really work on the quality of what they were saying and the grammar and some of those other things. And then the group with the AI spent significantly less amount of time on that upfront piece, but they spent a lot longer on the quality aspects of it, and still ended up finishing sooner than the control group with a better outcome. So I keep thinking about how, I don't know if that's replicable and how we can find, if that's something that we can hang our hat on, but I do think, I do wonder about, where AI can be really valuable in certain contexts and not so great in others. And how do we help create the literacy in our world for people to understand the value of doing it this way versus that way, or relying on the information from this source or that source.
Well, one thing I worry about related to that, and those are really good points, is the paucity of information that is relevant to someone that is unique or unlike the average. So the systems have been taught on the masses of data. And so if you have an interest in something that is highly unique, or if you need information about something that's highly unique, then there will be less information about that. So the issue is also just how it is going to winnow the number of topics that are easy to write about. And if you then want to write about something completely different, you are at a disadvantage, right? So the primary, I call the primary concern I have with AI statistical discrimination. I mean, if you're an outlier or a small minority, any sort of statistical reasoning will discriminate against you. And I mean, even a study like that, if you were an outlier in those two student groups, then whatever was determined about that group is going to be wrong for you, right? So it gets at, as I was saying, it's replicating and turning into a power tool, a practice that or a convention that we've had before. Academic research and empirical studies are also discriminatory against people who with disabilities, people who are unique. So it is really a mirror to many of the conventions that we've already set. The one additional thing I wanted to say about the use of AI and the ethical concerns there, to some extent, one of the other worries I have is the risks of using and giving away your data. There's a similar sort of smoke screen. Everybody's worried about privacy. And we have privacy protections are brought into legislation. But the reality, if you have a disability, is you're highly unique, you're going to be re-identified. So de-identification at source is not going to work. I can show anybody that how you can be re-identified. If you're the only person in the neighborhood ordering a colostomy bag, if you're the only person in the neighborhood who's Black in a white neighborhood, you can be re-identified. It doesn't matter whether your name and address and social insurance number is attached to the data. You can figure out who it is. The other way that privacy is protected is through differential privacy, where you remove the particular elements that are unique to you. But in doing that, we're also taking away the data points that are required to allow the system to actually work for you. So we're doing the opposite of filling the data gaps. So the system will understand you less by that form of privacy. But the ultimate reality is that most people with disabilities have already bartered their privacy for essential services. If it's the difference between getting aid and protecting your privacy, you're going to get an income so you can eat. So the issue shouldn't be privacy or it should be more than privacy, because people with disabilities are also the most vulnerable to data abuse and misuse. I was recently participating in a meetings with police up north, and the bad actors who were trying to do financial fraud got hold of a listing of people who were attending a dementia and Alzheimer's meeting. And so they saw them as perfect targets for fraudulent emails to tempt them into their particular schemes. So we need to think, before, at the same time as thinking about how we can use these things, we also need to protect people and have protections against data abuse and misuse, go beyond privacy, assume there's a breach, and how are we going to help people who are the victims of that breach and are thereby being targeted by it. And all the frowns are happening everywhere. We should talk about something positive.
Well, I was gonna come back to what you were asking about the papers. And I think about this a lot because I have 3 kids, one out of college, one still in, one in high school, and I'm constantly asking when they tell me about assignments they work on, it's like, what could possibly be the outcome the teacher wants the student to get from this? And I think this goes back to what I was saying about our education in general. outside of the AI, why are we asking kids to do certain things in education? What is it that we want? And we should reframe so that when you have a tool that comes in like this, it doesn't disrupt the whole system, right? So why do we write papers? I actually thought about this last week. Like, why do teachers still ask these students to write papers? It's kind of like when you go into a third grade class and they ask them to memorize all the state capitals. I'm like, what possible purpose is that in the education other than we've always done it, right?
So yeah, on the online chat, we have a comment. I think this isn't a question about seeing a documentary where Facebook got two machines talking to each other and they developed their own language so that the humans couldn't even understand them, I guess, after that. And then, are there more?
What was the story you were telling about the two AI bots that were talking, they were in like basically a
More
community?
thoughts?
Oh, well, actually, so this is a positive note.
Okay, good.
This is the hope and positivity break. So because I've been critiquing AI for quite some time, I was asked, well, then tell me how you would do it, sort of thing, from the AI centers that are out there. And so I proposed something. Well, I asked my community, and the IDRC has a fairly sizable community that is part of it. And what we decided to do was to propose what we're calling the baby bliss spot. And that's the name that the augmentative and alternative communication users gave it. And basically
That says the babe by police spot. But what she actually said was the baby bliss bot.
Right. Okay. So bliss symbolics, for those of you who don't know, is a ideographic symbol language that allows you to basically have a semantic shorthand, a meaning shorthand, and it's used by kids who have not yet developed literacy, who have cerebral palsy, who are non-speaking, and frequently who have very, very limited voluntary movements. And Shirley McNaughton is now a 93-year-old, but she was a school teacher who used this universal symbol language developed by Charles Bliss to see whether she could allow kids to communicate more than just the very concrete things. There are pictograms, but pictograms really don't have any abstract meaning. They're concrete representations of things. And she wanted kids that were using augmentative and alternative communication to be able to say more abstract and profound and meaningful things. So it's been a system that is in many voice output communication systems. So we thought, okay, let's not only look at whether we can create a chat bot of sorts that would allow us to use the semantic shorthand of bliss symbolics, but then interpret it for an unfamiliar listener. If you've met anyone that's using an AAC device or is using bliss symbolics, often there's a family member or a familiar friend who is very good at taking the semantic meaning and interpreting it into grammatically and fully formed English. And so can we do something very similar to that with a chatbot? But the other thing we wanted to do was to look at how do we raise it responsibly? And so what we've committed to is that the chief designers are the AAC users, and to actually turn the AI around, because right now it's winnowing and it's becoming more discriminatory, because the AAC users that are the communicators are very, very diverse. They all have very, very different strategies. We're going to see whether we can turn it around. And this is a strategy that we've tried in our hiring experiments as well. Right now, the hiring tools, when they're choosing who should get an interview or who should be hired, they're using what's called a data exploitation algorithm, meaning that they're exploiting the data to fine tune the best match to what was the successful optima. And what we're doing is we're sort of turning it around and saying, okay, let's turn that into an exploration algorithm where rather than honing in on or targeting in on that prior optima, we are trying to explore and diversify as much as possible the group of people that get the final interview, et cetera. But so we're in the baby bliss spot, we're also looking to see, can we turn these algorithms around so that they are going to be able to diversify depending upon and individualize the way that they work. But the biggest challenge is if we're using a large language model or a natural language, an NLP, well, natural language processing system, the pre-trained ones already come with a very, very polluted data set. So the problem is going to be, can we filter this water or whatever, or this very, very polluted system such that it's not going to do toxic and miserable things. So it's a big experiment, but everybody is extremely enthusiastic about it.
Did you want to add to that, Kelsey, before I read the next question from home?
No, but that was her project.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. You haven't built any baby bliss spots lately. Isn't that fun to say?
Yeah.
The baby bliss spot. I love that you named it that. All right. Are many AI products being specialized toward accessibility, such as including sign language or other data sets?
There may be, I don't know of any, off the top of my head. I do know there are, AIs that are being trained to interpret video, which could be used for things like sign language.
Yeah, but I think it's a very reductionist view of sign language, right? I mean, there have been experiments in finger spelling English, right, and things like that. But it completely ignores the facial expression, the social expressive parts of sign language. So, yes.
So we're saying not that we know of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not that we know of that are actually going to be very
Useful. So the next question is, for those of us working in digital accessibility, do you have recommendations of things we should do to ensure that we are informed in a way that can support a better progression? That we can stay up to date in a way that can help us speak up in effective ways?
Well, the first thing I would say is at least learn what tools are out there that are being used in your domain or your industry. Like if you've not played with ChatGPT, at least play with it so you know how it works. But the thing we kept saying earlier is keep in mind that it's AI, but it's not intelligence. It is pattern matching and math. And as long as you go into it with that understanding, it helps the process of learning what it's doing be easier. And also read the research, I think is an important part of that. So you know what research is being done in your domain, so that you understand where these tools may be introduced. I think for those of you who are in digital, the reality is companies like Adobe, as soon as it was like January, all of a sudden Adobe had this rush of AI tools that they're ready to release. So it's coming. I think it's important just know how it works so you can surface issues when they crop up for you in your work.
And know that they're manipulation machines. I mean, they're intended to manipulate, to show things in a positive light, to increase attention, and to monetize that attention. So you are the product to some extent. Your attention is the product, so go below the surface. Really try to analyze what is this. What is the intention of this? Who built it? Who is it for? And what are the implications for?
And
me
who's left
for others?
out?
What's that?
And who's left out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Bowden wanted us all to know that there's a flash flood warning from May 12th through May 14th. So that was up there in the chat. Then the next question is, do you think that AI could be used in customer service as a positive way for consumers with disabilities to share their communication preferences with companies so that they can better serve them? I prefer to have my documents in Braille, or I need to have a video call with the rep instead of calling, that sort of thing.
So right now, though, the problem is that, sorry, you were going to say something, but
You may be saying the same thing, but maybe not. I don't.
so the issue is that the more we use formulaic things, the more that people with disabilities gum up the system. So right now, the way that AI is performed or is performing is it's taking what is the average, what is the majority want. And it isn't very good at actually serving somebody that has something unique or unpredicted or that wasn't part of the training set. And so for things like customer service, et cetera, it's actually got a disincentive to serve people with disabilities because they gum up the system and they cause you to have more time. If you think about it, things like, I don't know, Amazon delivery people, there were surveillance systems used that had AI that were telling them how to be most productive and have the most, I don't know, the required process. And people started to be discouraged more and more from delivering to people who required additional things. And it actually was biased against that people who didn't need the standard majority service. So you couldn't actually go to the door and hand something to a human that you would be punished for that by the AI systems because it wasn't as productive or as efficient. And there are many other models of that. So possibly, but we really need to turn around the way that AI works.
I wasn't going to say the same thing.
Okay.
My answer is, and this is more of a UX answer. AI is not the solution for everything. Sometimes we already have established heuristics that work very well to solve that problem. The other thing that I think when I hear people ask me questions about AI for customer service, I think like, how many of you call customer service when you're happy? Right. And when you call customer service and you're not happy, do you want to talk to a chatbot or do you want to talk to a person? Right. And I think of that sort of experience and what people actually want and whether or not AI actually is the right solution for that particular situation. So it's not as easy as saying, can AI do it? Of course it can, but is it the right solution for that particular situation?
Okay, Tony has a question or comment.
Hi, my name is Tony. I have a question. It's basically wondering if you guys know if there's any sort of because I know right now, like for auditing tools, looking at designs, web designs, it's mostly looking at the HTML or ARIA. But I'm wondering if there's any sort of like image recognition, something like that, looking at designs or prototypes before it's even coded, so that we can recognize if there's any accessibility failures earlier before it even gets to the developers, just for like AI image recognition.
So you mean like
sort of
taking
stuff.
a mock-up and seeing if the contrast,
Not just contrast, but like in terms of if an accordion has pause, play, even like for someone that might not know that, or any sort of like motions in a prototype that might be like more than 3 flashes.
So
things
that
like that.
the unfortunate thing is even with codecs, there isn't much accessible code that has been trained on.
Mhm.
So there is Sherry Truen suggested that the accessibility community should train up an AI system on accessible code so that the code that is produced by the various coding tools, AI powered coding tools should do that. And similarly, that would require training up something to actually understand and to recognize and to optimize the positive pieces or the rules that are there.
I will put in, I will put in a plug for Intopia in Australia. They have and I don't know which one of them did this, but I remember looking on their blog where the programmer took an inaccessible interface, fed the code to the bot and said, make this agree to the rules, the WCAG rules. And it did a pretty good job. And then he prompted it more carefully and he ended up with an accessible version of that page. It was a really fun blog to read on Intopia there in Australia.
Yeah, and there's an emerging profession called prompt engineering where you continuously prompt. And so if we get more and more people prompt engineering these systems to be more accessible, then
And of course, you could always ask a person with a disability how they're doing with your prototypes, you know?
Exactly.
I love that
Thank you.
idea of being, including more people with disabilities, which it sounds like y'all are doing really terrifically in the process. So Mark told me we have 15 more minutes. I'd love for any other questions, and then I'd like some closing comments from y'all. We talked a lot about the risks. We were going to talk about the opportunities. I think it's good in this community, though, for us to be alert to the risks and be out there as activists. And but I'd love for is there another comment? Did you raise your hand, or were you just moving your glasses? No. Okay, Mark. I know, I keep calling you. And then
Hi, I'm Mitra. Well, mine is a question and a comment. And I wrote this down so I wouldn't butcher my thought. So we have tools like anti-bias training to help people make better decisions. It's to be determined how effective those tools actually are. So I'm wondering if we can do something like that for AI. And then we also have reparations for groups that have been systematically discriminated against. I'm wondering how that could be applicable too.
Yeah, so I'd love to comment on that actually. Yeah. So there are, AI ethics auditing is now an industry as well. And it's a burgeoning industry. There's more and more AI ethics companies that are popping up all the time. But if you look at the primary test that they have, it's what's called a cluster analysis. So you have a bounded cluster of data regarding a protected identity group, and then you compare that to the performance of the AI with the general population. And if it's more than 4/5, then it's biased, etc. Or if it's more than what I always get the 4/5 rule wrong. But anyways, the idea is you detect whether it's performing sufficiently worse for the protected group. The problem with that cluster analysis is that disability doesn't cluster. From a data perspective, disability is just difference from the average in a whole huge spectrum of ways. And so unfortunately what's happening is that AI applications are being certified as ethical based upon these tests without actually considering disability. And when we try to address that, we're told, well, we have this stamp of, we've been audited, we've been certified as ethical, our system is not biased. And so if you didn't get hired, if you didn't get in, if you didn't receive the right medication or whatever, it must be your problem, right? So it actually is somewhat of an issue if it's not actually detecting the type of bias that is harming you.
I was just mulling over whether I think anti-bias training works, but let me think about this some more, because I don't know that I know where you're coming from, but I just don't know if it's an applicable comparison between the two.
So then you want to wrap us up and tell us what we should take away from today and what we can do as a community? Elisa.
Sure.
posted a note up there.
Oh,
This is one of the messages. I just want to call your attention to a Google group called Human Centered AI. And if you have not joined it, please do.
human-centered AI. It's a Google group that Elisa says we can all join.
And Ben Schneider runs it.
Ben Schneiderman runs it.
The ACI guy from way back.
From Maryland at the moment,
Professor
yeah.
Emeritus from Maryland. And these issues need to be starting to be discussed. We talk about ethics, we talk about the human focus. And we need folks talking more about this disability issue on that list, because those are the people who are already concerned about the human focus with AI.
So we need more people talking in this group that was just mentioned about disability. They have a human focus, but we need to elevate the disability focus in this group. So that's one thing you can do, is join. And do I have other things here? Okay. So I'm going to leave it to y'all to wrap up. Final thoughts. This is a really powerful group of advocates you have in this room. So you send them forth with a mission, and I bet you'll see progress. That's a challenge for y'all too.
So one of the questions that we sort of discussed before was how do we measure whether an AI is successful? And I think it made me think about, how do we measure anything that is successful? And unfortunately, what certainly within academia, but also within markets, et cetera, it's, how successful is it for the average? We're always looking at the highest number of, impact is measured by the highest number of positively impacted homogeneous individuals, right? For a homogeneous or a single success story or successful approach. And I think AI, Gesundheit. AI, hopefully AI will make us reconsider not just how are we doing this with an AI, but what is success, and what are alternative measures of success that are not going to be so damaging to people who are at the edges of our human scatter plot, and isn't going to increase disparity. And so that the measure that I think we should use is it benefiting the people that are at the very edge, the people that are having the greatest difficulty with our current systems, or that can't use the current systems. So rather than measuring for the average, think about how far to that jagged edge of our scatter plot of human needs is this serving, and let those individuals that are have the greatest requirement for this, require the greatest innovation, be the judges of whether this is successful or not.
I'll end on something that you briefly brought up around prompt engineering. I would say start to learn how these tools work and how they consume prompts, because we're all going to end up using some type of a prompt in the next 2 to 3 years anyway. They're going to be built into everything. And so the more you know about how to prompt, the better, because it'll also help you give feedback to the vendors who are creating the tools. The example I used earlier was, if you go in and you ask a tool like Midjourney to generate you a picture of a tech professional, what picture do you think you'll get back 10 times out of 10? Right. And so just understanding that it's by default going to give you an answer, and understanding how to get the right information out not only helps you understand the tools better, but also can help you give feedback to the people who are feeding it the data that is being used to teach it how to generate its outputs.
Maybe we should have academic programs in accessibility, prompt engineering, right? For those that are for the academics out there.
Well, I just want to say thank you. I knew this was going to be profound and engaging, and you have not disappointed. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you for attending Access U. Yes, indeed. And this is our QR code for you to evaluate this session. And you can expect one more survey to come at you next week that's going to ask for evaluation of the entire conference, the things that that we got right this year and the things that we could do better. And as soon as we get that, we'll start planning for next year. Hope to see you then. That was great. I knew it would be. Oh. Yes.
Hi, my name is Piyush, and right before this presentation, I was talking with Tony about my experiences with AI and accessibility. So I just wanted to share it with you guys as well. So in the earlier days, so right now we have GPT-4.